All right, let's get into this discussion now. There has been mixed reaction to the incoming government of national unity. The ANC, Democratic Alliance, IFP and the Patriotic Alliance have struck a deal which saw President-elect Cyril Ramaphosa return for another term on Friday. Let's get some reaction now from the Business for South Africa Chairperson, Martin Kingston, and SAFTU's spokesperson, Trevor, Shaku. To both of you, gentlemen, thank you very much for making time for this conversation. Perhaps this is a calmer environment given the events of Friday and Saturday. Lots of activity in the parliamentary precinct. Let me start with you, Trevor, in studio.
Sure.
We've just had the MK party, which has 58 seats in the National Assembly. They are the 15% party there, so they can't be ignored. They are now saying that they are willing to take up those seats after consulting with their lawyers. But more important, perhaps, is what the leader of the MK party has had to say about the GNU that is incoming. He says it's completely meaningless. What do you make of that?
Look, the name we give to this multi-party government for us is not a problem and does not matter as such. What is of great importance is that there is a constituted government. Of course, because none of the parties got outright majority, we had to arrive here where we have a multi-party government, and that multi-party government has to come and stabilize governance in this country because we've got law and order to enforce as a government, but also to ensure that crime, corruption, but also just the day-to-day running of government activities and tasks is executed. This is one. But two, we as the South African Federation of Trade Unions are not concerned with whatever label they give to this government, like I said. What we are concerned with is the political substance and the economic content of the government that will emerge out of this particular multi-party government. And of course, we can begin to make hints in relation to what they've put forward in their own manifestos. But the comments which have been cast around as a result of just undermining the constitution of the multi-party government, in our view, I think are just far-fetched from people who bitterly did not get the votes they were looking for, and as a result want to undermine at whatever opportunity and with whatever chance they get to undermine the constitution of that government. There's nothing they can do. They are going to have to accept the government. The people of South Africa have voted, and everybody has to accept the votes because these are the decisions which have been made by the population that voted, the majority population that voted. It forced these parties into a multi-party government, and as a result, we are, of course, drawn and has to respect that. But like I said, it is the economic content that we are concerned with. And based on what the ANC has implemented in the past 8 years, based on what the DA has put in the manifesto towards the elections, we can already understand that what is going to happen here is just the continuation of the macroeconomic framework that has been implemented before, which seeks to achieve fiscal contraction, which seeks to merely reduce government's role in the economy to that of playing the creation of the enabling environment for the business sector to thrive and create employment, to that of, again, retaining the tendering and procurement system, which, by the way, is a problem for this government. So we are, of course, worried about that particular macroeconomic framework, and I will get into details as the conversation continues.
All right, let's get Martin Kingston to also weigh in on this. Martin, very briefly, if you can, there are much deeper issues that we've got to get into, but the former president of this country, Jacob Zuma, who now leads a 15% party in parliament, says that the GNU that has been announced is meaningless for them, and that is why they are going to fight it tooth and nail, if you like.
So I think, first of all, I should wish everybody a good evening and happy Youth Day. And it is youth we have to focus on because the major issue, as you said previously, is that of unemployment alongside inequality and poverty. And we need to put in place the necessary economic policies. And when I say put them in place, implement them with the resources drawn from all sectors of society to see a meaningful and consistent, inclusive economic growth rate emerge as quickly as possible. And what we've seen in the elections is democracy at work. And I agree with everything that Trevor has said in that regard. I think we should applaud it. There's no doubt in, I think, anybody's mind in the business community that we saw free and fair elections. We would have liked to see a bigger turnout, but we need to be able to pass legislation that is appropriate and fit for purpose for the country in the circumstances in which it finds itself. And an enabling environment is absolutely critical in that regard. You know, a vibrant opposition is good. It holds people to account. But what I welcome about the government of national unity is that we've got parties that, within the context of government, will hold each other to account. That's what partnerships have to do. And they'll have to find each other as quickly as possible, because there's huge pressure on the system to actually address many of the challenges we've got as a country, including crime and corruption, including the areas where businesses are already collaborating and partnering with government, not only in the context of crime and corruption, but energy, transport, and logistics. There will be many more. We need to pick up the pace, and we need to see real and discernible movement. And there's no doubt that being able to draw on the best of the parties that now form the GNU, not just, I have to say, the ANC and the DA, but the IFP and the other parties that have signed up to it, I think that we'll see very quickly discernible progress. And as I said, people holding one another to account.
Yeah. Trevor, Shaku, let's quickly come back to you and talk about what the labor movement in this country sees coming out of this GNU, because if the ANC's partners within the so-called tripartite alliance, for them, the inclusion of the Democratic Alliance in this GNU is a non-starter. But how do you see it as a labor movement that sits outside of that fold? Could it hold some promise for workers?
Look, the inclusion, let me perhaps start with a disclaimer, because the various noises coming from different quarters, including from within the tripartite alliance, have made comments which insinuates that ANC is different from the DA. Now, that is a point of departure for us, because we do not think that the DA is different from the ANC. Their macroeconomic policy frameworks are similar. Yeah. There may be divergence at foreign policy, for Ukraine, Russia, Palestine, Israel. There might be divergence in the labor market policy, and there might be a divergence in the employment equity and BEE as redress measures. Yeah. But in all other instances, the DA is similar to the ANC. So the idea that we've got to sit here and labor that the DA entering that particular space will make things worse. We understand that ANC has actually made things worse, because if we are to assess what is in the ANC's manifesto and what is in the DA's manifesto, especially on the macroeconomic framework and how they propose to address the issues of unemployment, especially youth unemployment, are similar. The way in which they want to grow the economy and lead economic development of this, it's similar. And let me just draw parallels of how this is similar. Firstly, the ANC has been embarking on a fiscal contraction on the belief that there's one set of money which the private sector and the public sector is contesting for, and therefore government that raises interest rates and as a result makes the private sector not to be able to invest in the economy. That is the basis for the fiscal contraction they've been embarking on. They think that the public debt is crowding out private sector investment, and as a result, they have, tightened the screws of fiscal policy to try to ensure that the private sector is invited. But secondly, they are again embarking on a program in the industrial policy of trying to attract foreign direct investment, but also trying to create an enabling environment, a conducive environment for the private sector to come and invest. All of these particular provisions in the macroeconomic framework of the African National Congress are similar to those in the DA. The only difference is that the DA then adds the problem, or what they consider as a problem, the idea of the national minimum wage. They say the national minimum wage impedes the creation of employment because it makes the hiring, the price of labor power, to be expensive, and as a result, it hinders some of the business to be able to hire. Of course, we differ with them on that. But what I wanted to clear here is that the DA's macroeconomic framework is not different to that of the ANC, and therefore any attempt to insinuate that they are different is merely to try to project the ANC in the light as a liberation movement which is left-leaning and progressive, and that is not the case.
Yeah.
So what we're going to get out of the multi-party government is what we've been getting in the past few years.
Martin, let's come to you. This is what business has been hoping for, at least on the part of the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. I read the Business Leadership South Africa leader there saying that it is time now that the president appoints a cabinet that is going to almost be fit for purpose. Is that what is going to appease the business community? Because already you are a shoe-in terms of what you wanted this GNU to comprise or to be comprised of. What is the next most important step after this?
Well, Collie, I think we need to acknowledge that although we've made progress, we actually haven't made as much or as broad a set of interventions as are necessary to drive economic growth. We need to recognize that at 1% or sub 1% economic growth, with population growth faster than that, we're actually getting poorer, not richer as a country. We're not addressing the fundamental challenges, particularly unemployment, let alone youth unemployment. And the only way we're going to do that is by investment. Investment requires an environment that inspires confidence, which is, as Trevor has said, friendly in terms of its macroeconomic policy, which creates the right predictable environment. And we're starting to see movements in that direction. And over the past 12 months, that's been manifested in a whole host of ways. We need to remember that business and the private sector, when I talk about it, large and small, formal and informal, domestic and international, creates 80% of the jobs in the country. It pays the vast majority of the taxes. It accounts for the lion's share of the fixed domestic investment in the country. And it's a force for good if it's harnessed in the right way. What we need to ensure is that our counterparties in government are capacitated and equipped with the wherewithal to be able to drive forward those policies, structural reform that is critical, ensuring that the operations within the state are improved in terms of their efficiency, that corruption and maladministration is rooted out. Business needs to recognize its ability to add value, but to stay in its lane. We need to respect the independence of the state. But what I think we're going to see now is the ability to bring in greater capacity, both from the ANC, from the DA, from the IFP, from other members of the Government of National Unity, and ensure that we have the best possible members of cabinet. That's what BLSA and BUSA have both said. They're both on the steering committee of Business for South Africa. We are, in fact, a product of Business Unity South Africa. And I have no doubt that we will want to engage as soon as practically possible with the president, as we've been doing every 6 weeks for the last year, and his cabinet members, to recommit to the partnership, potentially to broaden and deepen that partnership, and see how we can actually, as I said, bring the resources of business, its insights, skills and capabilities to play, to ensure that we can address the challenges and achieve our potential as a country. And the electorate is going to have relatively high expectations, particularly in the light of what has been said, that we're going to see a change in the tempo. We're going to see an aggressive delivery program being rolled out now, which is absolutely essential, as I said, if we're going to deal with some of the challenges we have as a country.
Yeah. Quickly, before I come back to studio to Trevor here to wrap up the conversation, Martin, while I'm still with you, how then do we deal with a situation where some of the partners threaten to leave this GNU? Because whilst we're talking here, it may be, wishful thinking that we are well on our way to a stable government. But how do you deal with the instability of those who are going to say, we're not being listened to and we are not going to stay in this?
Well, Collie, as I said before, that's what partnership is about. It's about listening to other people in the room. We're going to have to get used to that as a country. By the way, the ANC itself, when it had a majority had to listen to very diverse opinions and then forge a sort of common path. Exactly the same thing is going to happen here. Perhaps there's a greater disparity of views that need to be considered and aligned. What we as business, and I believe what society requires, is a government that has the ability to pass appropriate legislation and not just pass it, but then implement it efficiently in a manner that withstands scrutiny. And for that, we need to have the ability to demonstrate that 60+% of those who voted are represented in the government of the day. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see in the executive that emerges in the coming days and weeks. We mustn't be impatient, but by the same token, we need to accept that there needs to be real pace, that we need to get runs on the board and demonstrate movement as quickly as possible. I don't think that it's going to serve any party that's a member of the GNU any good to be on the outside watching. They need to be on the inside participating and indeed expressing their views, even if they're dissenting views. That's absolutely part and parcel of the democratic process.
All right, Trevor, very briefly, closing remarks from you. Once the government is formed, surely Labour has a particular interest in who is going to lead the economic cluster. Mm-hmm. Labour, perhaps a Labour minister, who, for you, as you've said, in the last 30 years, the workers have really gotten a raw deal. Who would make for a good group of economic cluster ministers and Labour, if you like?
Look, I don't think any individuals put there would make any substantial changes. What will be of great importance here will be the economic program that is adopted, not the minister that is put in place there. Because the minister that is put in place will merely be implementing the program of that particular government. So we are bracing ourselves for a battle. We're bracing ourselves for a battle with the DA in that particular government of national unity or multi-party government, whatever they call it, that they should not reverse the gain of the national minimum wage, which had been won. In fact, if anything, SAFTU have been campaigning that the national minimum wage is not adequate to afford a decent wage to our workers, and therefore ought to be increased gradually to a 72 rands per hour. Two, we are bracing ourselves for a battle with the DA and the ANC on the reversal of the preferential procurement as a matter of redress, but also we're preparing ourselves for a battle again in employment equity, because in their manifesto they are saying that they are not willing to have a continuation of a racial redress in employment equity through which the Department of Labour and Employment gives targets to industries and, of course, by extension, the companies in those industries, targets of racial filling of vacancies in those particular companies and industries. Oh. We're also bracing ourselves for various other battles, but more so, the government of national unity represents nothing but a macroeconomic policy framework of neoliberalism, and we are going to have to continuously fight against the austerity measures which are implemented in the name of fiscal discipline and fiscal consolidation. Right. We're going to have to fight all of those things. Unfortunately, we don't have time.
Indeed, we could have budgeted for more, but we're going to blame that on the marathon media briefing we had earlier today. All right, Trevor Shaku from SAFTU, thank you very much for your time. Martin Kingston from Business for South Africa, thank you indeed for your contribution this evening.